We are live here on the Secrets of Success podcast with Dr. Shane Needham, where our theme is Never Be Outworked, and we couldn't have a better guest to give a great example of that Never Be Outworked theme today. And we'll be hearing from Dr. David Bell in just a minute. And let me give some introductions here. We're going to be talking about chromatography. That's science. We'll talk about that in a minute. Chromatography, Rule America, and the Never Be Outworked mindset with Dr. David Bell today. He comes from us from all the way from Pennsylvania, and rural Pennsylvania, Penn State University, Bellefonte area, for you that are familiar with it. And for you that are watching where I'm from in Moscow, Idaho, every time I've flown into Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, it reminds me of home. It reminds me of the Palouse and Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho. So again, welcome to Secrets of Success with Dr. Shane Needham, where our theme is Never Be Outworked. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on LinkedIn. Visit my website at drsneedham.com. You can also see all of our previously recorded episodes from our podcast where we talk about science and never be outworked mindset for everything we talk about, relationships, science, COVID-19. That's been a big one. So we've talked about that as well. You can see that on all the streams of YouTube, my YouTube channel, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud. And I would like to welcome, and you can call in today. You can see the banner streaming across the way. And you can call in at 877-995-2111. And, you know, I've been so excited these last couple of weeks. This will be my fourth, I would say, major director, vice president of an organization, of a scientific organization that I've had in the last month. And it has been huge. And I want to thank all my viewers, all my followers. We have over 100,000 engagements on social media in just a little over a month, and that is incredible. So thank you to all those people that have been on so far, and we have a great line of guests coming up. I'm booked all the way through into October, which has been really, really cool. So stay tuned. And what this last month has really meant for me is why I started this podcast was there's as we know, during COVID-19 and the quarantines, scientists have to get a voice out to the global community. And to be honest with you, we're not very good at that. We are good at writing white papers and writing literature papers and getting them peer reviewed in, in journals that can take months to get this information out, sometimes years after you do the research. We're good at going to conferences and giving talks and giving presentations and giving poster presentations. And by the way, those are all very important. I still love to do those kind of things. But those aren't for the general public, and that is not going to get information out to the general public as quickly as possible. And so that's why I've started a social media campaign. That's one of the reasons I've started this, and to let other people know that scientists, no matter how many letters they have behind their names, they are still just people that can relate to others, that can talk with normal conversations. And so I'm really, really excited to introduce Dr. David Bell. And he is here to tell us his story about science and story about anything he wants. He certainly has the never be outworked mindset. And so Dave, he's a great friend of mine. I've known him over 20 years now. And so I can't believe how much time flies. We were just talking offline about our kids. I remember when his youngest daughter was born, and what is she, 22 or 23 now?
Yeah, 27.
Oh my goodness. That really dates. Okay. All right. So incredible. So what a great time we're having. And so Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Shane, first, thanks for having me on. This is really cool. And as far as not being good at getting the science out or doing podcasts, this is my first one. So you got me doing it too. So
congratulations. You're going to do a great job.
So my name is Dave Bell, and I am a director of R&D at Restek Corporation, which is, Shane said, was a chromatography company, where what we do is we build tools to separate molecules into different species so we can basically count them and identify them. It's like, picking sand out of the beach, and picking the green ones from the red ones from the black ones, and we do that with chemistry, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll get into more chromatography in a minute. Chromatography actually dates back to the 1890s, where Michael Sweat, he was actually a botanist, separated the colors of a leaf, actually, two greens and an orange, chlorophyll. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, but it means color writing is actually what it means, because back then you were separating colors, and that has just kind of stuck. But we'll talk more about chromatography, and I'm sure Dave will have to catch me and I'll have to catch him about using some acronyms and buzzwords that maybe the general community doesn't know. But when he talks more about chromatography, if you just, wherever you're sitting or standing, you just look around, and it is used all around you for every single industry you can think of: food science, petroleum, pharmaceuticals, clinical, everything. Chromatography is used. So keep describing yourself and tell us your story, Dave.
All right. Sort of grew up in rural America, like as you did, in mid-state New York. Always been, kind of in the math science realm. And my father said basically I can go to any of the New York State schools. So I chose Plattsburgh, New York, which is up just a little shy of the Canadian border. So if you're talking rural, it's quite rural. Basically the criteria was it had to have a biology program, because that's what I initially started off studying. I think if I remember one of your podcasts, you started off in biology as well. Is that true?
I was always kind of chemical engineering. Then I chose chemistry, more science based. But yeah, my son's studying biology in college now. So
excellent. So first couple of biology courses were very much memorization type things, and kingdom, phylum, order class, and I always figured I could look those things up. And I had to take chemistry as part of the biology program, and I thought, that's pretty cool. So I jumped over into that pretty quickly, and then actually had to take physics as part of the chemistry program, and I really very much thought about going into that. But
wow.
I looked at the 5 physics majors, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with that, or if I could honestly hang out with all those guys. So I decided to stay in chemistry, and I think that was probably a good move on my part.
Really good move, sure.
Certainly did not have the work ethic at that point in my life. I tended to play around in college a little bit more than I probably should have, chasing girls, and what I like to say is then I caught one, and then I didn't know what to do with it. So I decided to kind of buckle down, and after maybe a couple extra years in undergrad, started getting stuff together. And actually, it was working very hard at the tail end of undergrad to get into a master's program. I kind of cut a deal with a couple professors and said if I get the GPA up enough, they'll let me into the master's program. Turned out one of my buddies that was a year ahead of me went to Gainesville, Florida, and convinced his boss to give me a spot. And I was actually planning on doing that. And it just happened that there was a pharmaceutical company up in northern New York, didn't even know it existed. And they put out a couple pamphlets at the university saying they had jobs. And I just went up, honestly, just to practice more than anything else. And ended up, again, it's kind of serious with the girlfriend and now wife of 29 years.
Congratulations.
So thank you very much. More poverty in grad school or get a job and start a life. And but the plan was always to go back at some point. Interesting thing though is in Plattsburgh, really the only place I could go get a PhD. I get the master's at Plattsburgh, but that was not as useful in those days as it is today. So I was really looking at a PhD program, but there really wasn't any locally. So McGill actually in Montreal was probably the closest of all, and they very much thought about that. The borders were a little easier back then to get back and forth, but the distance kind of made me hesitate for a while. Yeah. And then I worked for a pharmaceutical company up there for about 6-7 years, and then actually moved to northern Vermont to take another job in the pharma, mainly because the previous one was going to move me to New York City, so I didn't really want to go or close to it. And then the University of Vermont became a possibility.
Yeah.
Right. So I very seriously thought about applying there and working on that. And then the other job switch kind of brought me to Central Pennsylvania. And so they're laid Penn State. And so after a very, very long talk with my wonderful wife, because that was, at that point, it was, two kids, a job, and it was going to be, I was the breadwinner, so I was going to have to go full time and also, kind of keep the family together, but also do the PhD. So it was going to be a lot on her. And we knew it. So luckily, I'm very lucky. She supported me through that, and we were able to do the PhD, keep the job, keep the marriage, and get the degree.
That's awesome. So let me get this straight. So what you did, and I remember these days, advisor, yeah. Well, certainly we talked a lot about it because I was in the same boat. But you were working full time, and then on the nights and the weekends or whatever in your spare time, you did your PhD, correct?
Yeah, pretty much full-time both.
Full-time both. Yeah. So like me at that point, you didn't have a lot of hobbies. You didn't, but you buckled down and you did that. And so congratulations to you, Dave. Tell me about, I don't remember the timing of that. When did you start that program and when did you finish?
So just after you finished, actually. So it was about, I think I jumped in 99.
Okay, I finished in 2000, but yeah, I thought you started. So you started in 99?
I don't remember if it was 99 or 2000. I think it might have been. I think I started the process in 99. Applying and getting make sure I get in. But yeah, it was basically right on the coattails of you finishing up that I started.
And so when did you finally get your degree, your PhD?
2005.
Wow, incredible!
So
I mean, so really 5 years, and working full time, supporting a family, 3 kids, incredible.
Actually beat most of my cohort out.
I did the same thing. It was amazing. I'm like, I'm working full time and they're just doing grad school and I'm actually finishing ahead of time. But I had a lot of support at work and just, I know like you did. And you know what? I think also what happens is you're so goal oriented and your mindset is so different at that stage that you know what you want and there's no time to mess around.
Yeah, and one of the advantages of going back later is I already kind of established what I wanted to do, right? So there wasn't a whole lot of 2 years of trying to figure out what you wanted to do for your PhD. Plus, I had another daughter come along during that. We still haven't figured out quite how that happened. But having 4 pairs of blue eyes looking at me, going, when are you going to be done?
That's right. Yes,
that's motivation right there.
Well, what a great story. It really, really is. And I know maybe we'll get into that later. I know having that PhD has really helped you to develop your career. And it's one of those things that in science and research, you're just kind of expected to have it. So, but let me ask you this first. So, like a lot of people early on in their careers or early on in their college, they may not be focused. They may not know what they want to do, or they may not be totally just academically driven, so to speak, to just get it done. But obviously somewhere along the way, something clicked with you. Obviously you found a great wife. And I think just kudos to you. Congratulations. I love that story, by the way. And I've met her. It's been a long, long time, but tell her hello for me and just glad you guys are happy. And so, but what kind of clicked with you and what did you learn because of where you were brought up in upstate New York, a very rural, for those that don't know upstate New York, it's very rural. I mean, I don't know, would you say an hour north of New York City, it gets pretty rural? Is that Albany?
Even less, really.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up close to Albany.
Okay. And so
we call it mid-state New York. Yeah.
How did that shape your mindset growing up in rural America? How'd that shape your mindset when you went back to get your PhD and just had to buckle down and work? How'd that shape you?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure really how that sort of environment did. I think that sort of environment, just the fact that I like that type of environment, more shaped my job decisions. So I was very happy. I've always wanted to do more research work, but I also wanted to live in the country, and that made it kind of difficult, especially starting out, because
Absolutely.
a lot of the jobs are in in the northern Jersey or southern New York area, especially when we were coming out.
Absolutely. Or Boston.
Yeah, sure, or San Francisco or something like
Sure.
that. But
Sure.
so I can even remember when when you used to have to actually get the maps out and flip through them. I used to call it the the yellow crap or the orange crap that was around the cities. I don't want to be in there. I want to be out here.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's I'm not sure how it shaped me in terms of work ethic and things like that. I mean, I think you had mentioned that you grew up on a farm and you're doing a lot of lifting and working and stuff. I did not. I had pretty middle class family. We just happened to live in the woods. That's all. And I my first job was shoveling crap out of stalls and from in a stable. So I mean,
that's a big deal, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that is. You know what? There's a lot of people that have not experienced that. If you grew up in a city, obviously you wouldn't experience that. And I think, you because you. I don't know, Dave. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but how I feel is, we obviously travel the world. Because of our positions and whatnot, and being in the science industry, going to conferences and visiting clients and all that. But when you meet people that are they've only been in an urban area, they've only been in cities, they have no concept of shoveling out stalls. And so,
I have no concept of, walking down crowded streets either. So
exactly.
I have no street sense whatsoever. So
yeah, me too. So that's really, really interesting. And so maybe it did shape you, but you knew where you wanted to live. You knew that you wanted to live, and that, like you say, when you're working in research, that is not easy to do. And so that's why you have a great position there in Bellefonte. And you're in rural America, but you're doing some really, really cool science, and that leading a great team. So that's just awesome. So tell us, I don't remember the exact time. I always like to think about how important it is, not only about the science, but about the relationships I've built over all these years. And I don't remember the exact first time we met, and maybe our stories are different. I'm not really sure. So tell us about what you remember.
I think. Yeah, well, we had been communicating, by email. I think mostly to start. I think you were working on your PhD with Phyllis, and we were supporting you with chromatography tools.
Yeah,
and I think the first time I really remember meeting you face to face, I think, is when we had an open house here. We were opening up our analytical services lab.
Correct. That's correct.
Which is right over here, by the way.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I think you came to visit along with several other people as a celebration of opening the lab. And then I think the first. I mean, obviously, the first time we really did something together is when we traveled together.
That was cool. Yeah,
right?
We taught courses together. That was cool.
Yeah, you played the mass spectrometrist, and I played the chromatographer. That just got this funky looking detector on his bench. And it was great. And to be honest with you, of all the travels I've done, since then, that one still sticks in my mind as one of my favorites.
Yeah, mine too. Those are some really, really good times. And that's where I forgot that we met actually at that facility in the open house. I forgot about that, but there's a lot of people there, and there's a ribbon cutting ceremony, and Dave Bleasner was there, a common friend of ours who I keep in touch with as well. And so that's really, really cool. And then we started teaching courses together, and we did research together too. And that was really, really cool. And that's just awesome. So tell us more about your science history. So you said a little bit about some of the, and I'm familiar with them because I know your story a little bit, but talk about some of like your first job, and then where you went, then the next place you went, and then just talk about those increasing responsibilities, the different roles, what you did and what you didn't like about it. Tell us about that.
Sure. So, I mean, I think coming out of undergrad, like many chemists who think, oh, chemist, okay, I'm going to go do chemistry somewhere. I didn't really have any particular area that I was, completely enamored with. I guess, if anything, I thought I would do more synthetic stuff. It's kind of what you kind of envision with chemistry.
True. Yeah.
Not so much analytical. But the first first job I had was with a pharmaceutical company. It was Wyeth Arist at the time now, and it turned into Pfizer eventually. And my first job was actually doing thin layer chromatography at this facility. I chose it. I had a choice of a couple different positions when I went to interview, and I chose it mainly because I really liked the gentleman I was going to work with. He turned out to be one of the best bosses I ever had, in fact. And he was an inspiration because he recognized that I like to do the development type work rather than just kind of running, pushing buttons and running methods. And I'm also really glad I started with TLC because thin layer chromatography, you can actually, it's exactly what you described earlier. It's color mapping, right?
Yeah.
Or color.
Why don't you go ahead and describe thin layer chromatography to the person? And actually, there's some really good science fair experiments that you can do with your kids, basically using thin layer chromatography. So go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. So you can separate colors like the pigments in beets and cabbage, and those are kind of classic.
And color markers, like when you pick up a blue marker, you think it's only blue. No, there's more
blue,
color.
Yellow, green, yellow, yep. Yes. So, So I mean, it was a visual right away of
So what were you guys separate? What was the industry?
This is pharmaceutical.
Oh, it was.
So we would use it. A lot of the methods were compendial methods, so things that are on the USP for drug release testing. We often would use it as a cross-validation tool for things like high performance liquid chromatography or gas chromatography methods. So it might never have gone into a monograph, the stuff that we were developing, but it would definitely be part of the data that we would send to the FDA to get a drug approved.
Got it.
To support the approval of drugs.
That's really cool. So let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah. We'll just expand on how would you describe, and we did this a little bit, but how would you describe chromatography to the layperson? And I guess some of the different modes as far as gas versus liquid, something like that, and describe that, and then maybe describe some of the industries that it's used in and how many of them are. So describe that, and let's spend some time on that.
Okay, so the one I usually use is I think most people are familiar with pharmaceuticals. So, like you have aspirin, and pharmaceutical company makes aspirin. We have to ensure that not only putting aspirin in there, but not putting anything else in the drug product that might be toxic to people. So chromatography is a tool that we use to basically separate all those components of a drug product. So that pill of aspirin is not just aspirin; it's aspirin plus fillers plus what we call excipients, things that we can press together to make a cool little tablet out of it, and sometimes hiding flavors or enhancing flavors, things like that. So what we want to do is we want to put all those things together to make a nice product, but we also have to separate them all in order to be able to tell you that that's 99.9% aspirin, and it's at the dosage level that you expect to get, and it doesn't contain things that are toxic to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the different modes, like gas versus liquid, and why would they be used in different ways? Can you describe that in layman's terms?
Yeah, well, I could try. So liquid chromatography and gas chromatography are the two main techniques that are used. Liquid chromatography, especially for the pharmaceutical industry. So the difference between them is generally what we call the mobile phase, or the carrier of the chemicals through the system, and then you also have what we call a stationary phase, which is what I work on is actually the chemistry of that stationary phase. What I try to do is make things that want to interact with some molecules differently than it interacts with other molecules. So as they go through a column or a support of some way, they come out at different times. And that way, if I can separate them, then I can detect them individually and even count how much of them are there. So in liquid chromatography, we use a liquid phase to go through, and it interacts with the solid phase. And in gas chromatography, we use a gas system that goes through and interacts with the solid phase. Okay, and the reason you would use the different ones, we have to for some molecules or will go into the gas phase, some molecules will not. So if they don't go into the gas phase, I certainly have to use a technique that's different than the gas chromatography. But gas chromatography tends to be a little simpler in terms of its interactions and can be extremely efficient and separate things that are very, very close together in terms of their chemical makeup.
Definitely. It's actually incredible, the efficiency. We won't get into that necessarily.
Sure.
It's incredible. I mean, to think about how much we accept the width of an LC peak compared to a GC peak.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what? There's no diffusion in and out of the mobile phase because there's no mobile phase, right? I mean,
basically, yep.
It's incredible.
Yep.
And so,
but you also, the power of liquid chromatography is in the mobile phase. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. And so that's just really, really interesting. So, usually, this is when I became really enamored with the history. I like history anyway, just overall, but I started becoming enamored with the history of chromatography and separations and mass spectrometry when I was deep into my PhD. I don't know if it was the same for you. Chromatography is not that old, actually. It's only, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and, about the time of the Industrial Revolution. And so can you tell us a little bit? I don't know if if you followed the history of chromatography, can you tell us a little bit about the first chromatography and kind of how it developed over time and just some of those stages?
Boy, I don't know if I'm not really the history buff, but I mean, not really, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about chromatography is you think about the botanist, Michael Svet. He was the Russian, and he actually came up with, I guess, the theory of separating all those chlorophylls from those plants, and he could detect it using his eyes. So that was he could see those different colors. And what was interesting, Martin and Senge, they won the Nobel Prize for it in the 40s for gas chromatography, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was, one of the things that they said, I'll never forget this. Here's what they said about the techniques. They won the Nobel Prize for it, Martin and Senge, for gas chromatography in the 40s, I believe. And they said chromatography will never be a well-accepted technique because it's a serial process. And you know what? We still deal with that today. Mm-hmm. We still deal with that. You have to do separations one at a time, where there's other techniques where you can do multiple at once, ELISA assays and so on and so forth. And so
we're still trying to figure out a way around that.
Yeah. And there's some things you can kind of do, stacking and all these, and it's crazy. And then high performance liquid chromatography, one of my professor, she was one of the first ones to kind of start working on liquid chromatography in the 60s. That didn't come around until the 1960s. And then actually coupling mass spectrometry and high performance liquid chromatography or liquid didn't really come around until I mean, there were some archaic ways to do it in the 70s and 80s, but late 80s was when, APCI and ESI finally started to come to fruition. Now,
that's when you and I were actually trying to figure out
absolutely
what the boxes were.
Actually, that reminds me of something I've never had a chance to ask you. But we'll get to that in a minute. So I love the history of chromatography, and actually now I guess we'll just move on to it. So my PhD was based upon optimized stationary phases for mass spectrometry. And I thought it was a really cool piece of work. Dave was kind of involved in it because he was involved in what stationary phases we were going to use and whatnot at the company that we were getting the stationary phases from. He works for a vendor who, at the time, I was working for Pfizer, and we would buy stationary phases of LC columns from them, and they would specially design them. And it was really cool research. And we came up with methods to optimize putting together mass spectrometry and LC with the appropriate stationary phase and using high amounts of organic. And I think we know a lot more now than we did then, just like how science works. You just continue to learn more and more. So one of my questions, now we're going to get really scientific. You said this has probably been 10 or 15 years ago, maybe. And you said that the PFPP phase, you're familiar with that, right?
Just a little, yeah.
Yeah. And you use that in your research too, correct?
I did.
Okay, so polyphenol, pentafluorophenol. Pentafluorophenol. Yeah. Okay, so we both use that stationary phase in our research. He looked into I didn't really determine how it worked. It just worked. And you say that it's purely based on ion exchange. Is that correct?
For what we were doing then, yes.
So that's interesting. So in other words, if you had a pKa of a molecule, then you could, and 3 different pKas and 3 different molecules, you could predict where it would be eluted.
Yeah, actually, at a given, with some caveats, right? So remember, you were running in high organic.
Okay, I was wondering. Okay, I want to hear it. Yes.
So, so basically, what happens is the PFP has open lanes to the silica surface, right? Just the way it lines up, and especially if you get into the high organic, what you're really doing is forcing the molecules to interact with the silica surface, and that's where the ion exchange is actually coming from. It's not from the PFP ligand itself. It's the PFP is kind of setting the stage. It's not really interacting.
Is that right? So so at higher organic, you're actually opening up the channels where you'll actually get more ion exchange from the silica surface.
Well, so there's 2 things were happening when you were going to high organic. You were not only going to high organic, you're also diluting the buffer that you started with, right? So when you started at 10 millimolar and you diluted with 90 parts acetylnitrile, now you're at 1 millimolar.
Yeah.
So that's why you started to see the increase in retention, because the strength of your mobile phase was going down, actually, not going up.
Don't you think it was the U-shaped curve as well, where now you're
and in this part, reverse phase was dominant. And then as you drop the reverse phase partitioning characteristics, the ion exchange took over. Now, if you'd have kept it at 9 or 10 millimolar all the way through, you would have just seen a reverse phase curve. You basically attenuate all that interaction.
Would it even be possible to keep it at 10 millimolar with that high of organic?
Up until 95% or so.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah,
so did you actually show that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. That's really, and you guys published it.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to go look at some of those papers.
And it referenced yours as well. So
is that right? Very interesting. Okay, because I always thought it was just basically your mobile phase is now becoming more or less polar than your solute or your stationary phase. So you go from basically reverse phase to now normal phase interactions.
Yeah.
So, but I see what you're saying. That very interesting. So that's probably why it was probably why usually your peaks would get more broad,
but still symmetrical.
They're still symmetrical. Mm-hmm. Wow, fascinating. I did not know that. Oh, wow, that's cool. That's cool to learn. Okay.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, the other thing, you've done Hillick work as well, right?
Yeah.
So what's interesting about the PFP versus silica or some more polar phases, it's not polar enough to get that water layer on the surface. Right. So it does just the thermodynamics are not there to pull the water out of that mobile phase.
How'd you guys determine that? NMR or something?
Actually, by mistake. So when we were looking at the mechanisms, everything kind of looked, smelled, tasted like ion exchange. So the experiment was to end cap the experiment was to run it side by side against the silica column that the PFP was built on, and say, okay, well, if it's silanols, we're taking up half the silanols by putting the PFP down. We should get twice the interactions on the silica. That didn't happen. We actually got 3 times as much on the PFP because the water isn't there.
Wow, that's so interesting.
You have to think about that a little bit, because
wow, that is so cool. That's why research is cool, right?
Yeah,
because you didn't really expect that. That's really that's really interesting. Wow. So that's why a PFPP cannot operate in Hillick mode.
It can. I mean, you can run it in those solvent systems, but it's going to be ion exchange interaction. It's not going to be reverse partitioning.
Interesting. Wow. Very interesting. Oh, wow. That's cool. So
we've gotten sciencey on it.
Yeah, I know we did. So we threw out a lot of acronyms. We threw out a lot of things, and Hillick, and oh my goodness, hydrophobic interaction, liquid chromatography, all these kind of things, and hydrophilic interaction, liquid chromatography. So so we got a little non-layperson there, but I've always wanted to ask Dave those questions, because it was our research was overlapping. And I remember he told me that a long time ago. We were on a phone call and he says, "Oh, it's ion exchange." And I was like, I don't know. Okay, but now he
Yeah.
explains it and it makes total sense. So that's really, really cool. Well, that's great work that you did. So tell us about what is Restek? Restek is the company where Dave is the R&D director in the gas chromatography group. So tell us about Restek and then tell us about what your role is there.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a privately owned company or employee owned company. So one of the first things I think about in terms of aside from what we do and the chromatography tools that we build is the organization is amazing as far as the employees are concerned. The organization really takes care of the employees and really tries to provide us with health and wellness and programs that are just amazing. For a company of just over 500, we've got a full gymnasium and
It's
a
awesome.
full a workout room that would most companies would die for.
Yeah,
It's
awesome.
tremendous. But as far as what we provide, we built a company that was built on gas chromatography initially, and mainly capillary GC technologies. Early, I think in '85, the company started. So, and then kind of grew into doing LC and even more recently getting more into the sample preparation tools. So being able to develop tools to get the samples that we want to run by these techniques into a form that we can get them in to do good work. Got a tremendous amount of technical aptitude and a very service mindset here as well. So it suits me really well. My particular function is to direct the research and development for gas chromatography. And it tends to be a fairly mature technology right now, but there's still so much stuff to try and figure out. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do works, and sometimes we know how it works, and sometimes we don't. So it's been a little change for me. I tend to spend most of my time on the liquid chromatography side of things. In fact, when Restek first called me to come back, I had left the organization for a while, worked for another chromatography company. And when they first asked me to come back, I was like, "You don't want me. I'm an LC guy now." And and it was an interesting challenge. Again, maybe a more of a rural life decision. Wanted to stay here, and I wasn't sure whether other organizations were going to be around for the longevity that I wanted to have. So made the decision, came back, and it's again a learning experience. I still have a tremendous amount to learn about gas chromatography. But
So what would you say the main, I did a lot of some gas chromatography early on in my career with some environmental laboratories and in my undergraduate research as well, at Washington State University. And so what would you describe are still and a lot of technology has happened. A lot of technology development has happened. Things are a lot better. What do you describe are still the challenges?
I mean, for GC, it's a hot mess, right? So you're trying to get molecules through a system, whether it's the column or the injection port or to the detector, without having them degrade or interact with things you don't want them to interact with. So the sample path and the inertness of that sample path, but still you can't have it so inert that it doesn't, you don't get anything to interact, right? You'll never get anything separated. So it's a classic balance, chromatography always is, right? So we want it to interact, we don't want it to react, and we certainly don't want it to interact too strongly that we lose sample and lose signal. And getting just like basically all the separation technologies, we want to do so much more with a single injection, like you were kind of getting to. So in GC, multi-residue analysis. So these lists of 10,000 pesticides. I'm exaggerating a little,
Right.
but
A lot.
a lot of pesticides and trying to get compounds that are very, very different into the same analysis is that's an ever growing challenge for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys have some that I remember right, some proprietary technologies that you obviously you don't want to describe, but they have some names. Can you describe that at a high level? Just to describe what they are, because I mean I was always very impressed by them. With
Not,
like some of the inertness and so on and so forth from some of your columns and whatnot.
yeah, well, yeah, sure. I mean, other than just kind of telling you that we have proprietary means to deactivate surfaces, to again, it's one of those. It's a challenge always. Anything you put on to maybe stop one interaction from happening kind of makes something else happen. So, so it's really trying to find a balance, and obviously there's economy too, right? So I could make a gold lined column, and you might get the perfect injection out of it the first time, but
And nobody,
or it might be something nobody can afford too, right?
right? Nobody can buy it. I mean, nobody can afford it.
Sure.
I've heard that with mass spectrometry vendors is that they can make some types of sources that will actually, and needles and so on and so forth, and capillaries that will last forever, but nobody would ever buy them.
Right.
They're just too expensive. And it always does. You bring up a good point. Any business, it comes down to economics. You can make anything as good as you want, but is somebody going to buy it for that? And I know there's some really good HPLC column technologies and whatnot that I've heard about from some other vendors. And these columns would cost several thousands of dollars, right? Who's going to buy them?
That's right.
I don't care how good it is. If you can buy another one for 250 and use it only 1/10 of the time, that's just usually what people are used to. I can't explain the mindset, but it's a disposable cost. And so it has to come into play. I remember when I actually came to you guys' facility, I think that was the year 99 or 2000 when I met you the first time. And I believe I briefly spoke to an engineer, I think, that was making some of those inert surfaces to put in your GC columns or something. Is that true? Do you guys hire engineers as well to?
Yeah, it's actually we have a good assortment of engineers from
Is that right?
Mechanical. Yeah,
We
also make kind of what I call gizmos and gadgets, right? So some of the parts and pieces to the instrumentation, that maybe we have an idea of a different surface that would work better for certain types of molecules. We also do a lot of work with glass, not just for glass capillaries, but also for inlet liners and different shapes and different configurations to enhance certain types of vaporization.
And so you won't not only just hire scientists, chemists and so on and so forth, or material scientists, but also engineers on how to make things fit and whatnot, or what is that?
And you also mentioned material scientists. So I see that more and more as I've gotten older. There's been a lot more. I even encourage some of the bachelor degree chemists that want to do masters or PhD to go into material science, because there's very valuable to us.
It's very valuable, and it's valuable in so many different industries now. It's very, very interesting. Well, that's really cool that you guys hire so many scientists and you guys have grown. So when I was there in 99 or 2000, how many people were there then? It wasn't 500, I can tell you that.
It was. I think if I remember right, don't quote me on this, but I think I was number 54 when I came in. Yeah, and I know we hired globally, 499 and 500 a year and a half ago. So,
oh my goodness! Congratulations! What a great success story.
Yes.
It's awesome you've been a part of that. That's really, really cool.
A lot of it's been globalization, right? So we initially focused on the Americas and especially in the environmental industry. So we've been spreading to several other industries, and then also working on having our own offices in Europe and Japan and China.
You mean instead of just maybe distributors or something?
Correct.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. So what do you like most about your position?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the people in the science, right? So I think, as I've gotten older, it's been getting more joy out of kind of getting other people excited about going to the lab and doing stuff. Although, I kind of still want to do it myself.
Absolutely.
In fact, that's one of the reasons I'm back at work this week, because I'm going to try and take advantage and get into the lab while there's fewer people in the facility these days. But
That's awesome. That's
um,
awesome.
but yeah, that's the coolest part right now is just kind of trying to inspire, trying to get people to understand how cool this stuff is, which is not always easy, right? So
No.
you always tell the tale. I mean, I can't hire just anybody off the street to come in and do this, right? You guys are trained, and I'm not going to call you a chromatographer until you're at least doing this for several years,
Right.
right? So I mean, there's a lot to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sometimes hard. I think the easiest thing to do on an interview is hiring somebody that you can see that they could have passion for it. Right. And then when they can have passion for it and you just see their eyes light up when they start doing separations or development, or they start understanding something, it's really, really cool as a mentor and as a teacher to pass that on to them. And that's kind of a rare thing sometimes, because, but obviously it's something that you encourage very much so, and you obviously can lead that group very well. And what a great story too, that you're coming into work this week just because everything else is shut down, but you want to do some science and hands-on stuff.
And we're actually quite operational throughout this whole thing. Again, I give the leadership of the organization a lot of credit. We've been able to keep our operations going. A lot of our customers are still, we support the health industry, so we were an essential business, from the start. So, but at the same time, a lot of our job of people that are non-critical to the operation, was to protect them, right? So we were trying not to come on site very much.
Yeah. And it can be done at home. I think people have figured out a way to do it. And in some ways it's been better, right?
Yeah. Learned a lot, actually. And one of the things I've been really happy with is, a lot of the staff's learned, hey, I'm actually more efficient if I'm not in the lab all the time, right? So if I'm putting a little more emphasis on designing the study and kind of going back and taking that data and looking at it a little bit longer, before starting the next thing, right?
Right.
We're all kind of spontaneous when we're in the laboratory. So
yeah, it's definitely true. I certainly see some benefits from this, as well, as you always do. You try to see the silver lining in everything, and so that's great. Well, we love to see the passion in your in your day-to-day role, and just loving what you do, loving where you're at. That's really, really cool. And so, what do you think is the future of chromatography?
Yeah, it's a good question. You and I were were there when mass spectrometry was gonna kill chromatography, right?
Yeah.
And it turned out that if you really wanted to use that detector as best you could, you needed even better chromatography than we had in the first.
Absolutely.
So I think it's always going to be simpler to separate it, to identify it and or quantitate it. But there's, and guys like Jack Hennigan have been, touting this for years. If you know what you're looking at and you can selectively detect what you're looking at, you don't have to do as much separation up front. Getting it away from things you don't know about is probably about as much as you need to do. But so the answer really depends, right? So it depends on how much you're going to dig. If you're going to do, these multi-residue, 400 pesticide thing run at the same time, you're probably going to deal with, not having complete separation, but then using something orthogonal like a mass spectrometer to help pull things apart, or at least notice that they're there, so you can go in and dig a little bit more with a different technique. But some of the spectroscopic tools are coming along to help deconvolute spectra to help with lack of separation, mass spectrometry, of course. So I mean, I don't see it going away anytime soon.
I think it'll just continue to grow. But what do you think of, because sometimes we forget what chromatography is also offline sample preparation. I mean, solid phase extraction, filtering, that's all some type of chromatography. It really, really is. And do you see, like, for example, in your own company at Restek, do you see that that's more of a larger percentage of your growth in the future will be sample prep tools instead of online chromatography, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a general industry trend. I think, as the technologies, the GC and the LC and even mass spectrometry, mature, and the linkages between them mature, there's less, obviously less to focus on there. I think we're all more enamored with the cool instruments and the lights and and all the cool things we can do with it. And sample prep's always been kind of the dirty part of the operation. But there's some very elegant things you can do in sample prep as well. So the answer to your question is yes, I do believe that's an area of growth for us and for the majority of the industry.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, the easier we can make sample prep, then and the thing with sample prep too is now we have ways, whether it be 96 well plate or 384 well plates, that you can do it simultaneously on more than one sample at once. And, and that is one of the things when you're doing a single detector and, it's like you can only do one sample at a time. It might only be seconds long, but it's still only one sample at a time. And so I think the future is, and that's what I've been seeing too, is from some of the sample prep tools that you guys are developing and some other organizations are developing as well. Tell us some of the cool things you guys have in sample prep. I'm actually not familiar with a lot of the Restek products in sample prep.
Well, so a lot of it's like the standard solid phase extraction type techniques. We also have quite a bit in micro extraction, SPME, solid phase micro extraction, and also we're also working on things that are more extraction directly to the mass spectrometer as well. So kind of almost bypassing the chromatography ourselves. Again, a lot of that's going to be more targeted type analyses. But
would that be like SPME and then put it into a GC type of thing?
Or directly spray into an LC as well.
Oh, is that right? That's cool. Yeah. That's really, really cool. Yeah.
So again, there's definitely a place for that. So the things, you're targeted, if if you know your matrix, quite well, you could basically do a little bit of extraction, a little bit of cleanup directly into the mass spectrometer, help you with the isolation and identification, quantitation, quantification. So that's really cool stuff. And that's something I'm excited about.
That sounds really cool. Yeah. And I think that is definitely a future. I think you can almost look at it as a way of some of those devices are a way to store samples. Do you know what I'm saying? A way to store extracted samples. It's really cool. I mean, it's like you take that little chromatography piece, that's this big, extract your samples, store it. Yep. It's ready to go for whenever you want.
Well, I know you've worked quite heavily in the dried blood spot area.
Yeah.
So that's an area of interest or types of extractions and delivery and transport and historical the savings, archival, all kind of tools that we're interested in as well.
That's so cool. That's awesome. And that's definitely the future, especially as we start thinking about, and we had a guest on, Dr. Kevin Bateman, a couple of weeks ago about personalized medicine and sampling at home. And hey, that will happen more and more. It just absolutely will. And so chromatography, I mean, actually, if you even think about dried blood spot, and this is what I've always talked about people, is it's not just paper, it's a chromatography device.
Yep.
It might be very simple, but there's chromatography happening. Yep. It absolutely is. And so that's great that you can, extrapolate that or take advantage of that and build different media and so on and so forth. So that's really cool to watch. And we'll watch what you guys are doing and keep following your research as well, David. So one of the things that I have as we wrap this show up, we usually tend to be about an hour, is that I always like to ask, and I know you're going to have some, because you have a great story, what I've been finding about everybody that I've interviewed, vice presidents, presidents, directors, I always thought I knew their story, and I thought it was very linear, so to speak. I thought it was linear that, they went and they got their bachelor's degree, and then they went and got their PhD, and now they're Dr. such and such. No, that has never been the case yet. Never been the case with the people that I've interviewed anyway. And so I know your story will be similar, but I like to ask the question, I don't believe in failure. I don't believe in failure at all. I believe in learning experiences. However, some people looking upon our lives or even our own selves reflecting on our lives might think that we have an apparent failure that we remember, right? But it could have caused us more success in the long run, or to put us on a trajectory that we really appreciate and we're grateful for now. So tell us about one or as many as you want, and it can be life, career, whatever, one apparent failure that caused more success for you.
Yeah, I just described it not being very academic when I started, right? So I actually left school for a little while to I kind of told everybody to pursue a chefing career. Basically I left before they threw me out, and so I mean it was a true failure, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
I think what I got into was I got into the service industry, where I was playing sous chef and actually did think about going into cooking for a while. But what I realized is, I really hated working when everybody else was playing, and I really hated not having anybody to play with when I wasn't working. Honestly,
I get it. I get it.
And I really, I think I got I was on salary I made the mistake of living above the restaurant that I was working at as a chef.
Oh, wow.
And I think I calculated I made like $1.25 an hour for that, a week or, whatever pay.
Wow. Wow.
Like, I'm really not going to be able to survive this way, and nor do I really want to. Let's get back to the chemistry. Let's get back to, getting this thing done. And the other piece to that is when I had a very good mentor in Dr. Ed Miller at Plattsburgh, and he gave me the opportunity to do undergraduate research when I came back, and that is actually the thing that really propelled me. And I still struggle with the reading of it and the studying, the book type of learning. I do it, but it's not what I'd like to do. I'd rather go play with it. I want to handle it. I want to see it happen. And that undergrad research really allowed me to really shape my my desire to be a chemist more.
That's awesome.
And then getting those first couple jobs were very hands-on, and again the TLC was great because it was a visual and I could see things happening, and started to build that model of chromatography in the head very early. And
that's great. That's a great story. Yeah. Again, not linear. So you basically were either kicked yourself out or they kicked you out of undergrad to get your bachelor's degree, and then you had to think about some things, go work and be a chef and be a cook and think about what do you really want to do. And then you went back and buckled down and got passionate because you did some undergraduate research, and the rest is history. And that's a really, really great story, Dave. It really, really is. It's inspiring to me. I love to hear those stories, and they're never linear, and everybody has one. And so thank you very much. We've learned a lot about photography today. We've learned about your story. We learned about where you grew up in rural America. It's been great. We've talked some science. Sometimes we got really in depth about ion exchange and stuff. That was fun, by the way. I learned myself. So I've always wanted to ask that question for like 20 years, by the way. So it's been fantastic. Thank you for coming on my show. I really, really appreciate it. And viewers and listeners, again, you can find me on my YouTube channel, on Spotify, on iTunes, on SoundCloud. You can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Visit my website at drsneedham.com, and you get all that information there. And we're going to continue to have some great guests coming up. We're talking about nutrition and direct primary care. We're also going to be talking about eating disorders. Yeah, really important stuff that all has a big science background. You're going to meet some inspirational people. It's going to be really, really good. I'm looking forward to all those shows. Dave, thank you again. Say hello to your wonderful family for me. Keep living the American dream in rural America, and keep inspiring people, keep leading people. And again, Dave, thank you very much, and we will be in touch. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shane, and thanks for inspiring me and helping me get through my PhD.
Oh, well, thank you. Anytime. It goes both ways, my friend. So thank you very much. Let's be in touch.
Very good.